いらんからくて. Welcome back, everyone, for the day 2 of Adventure Travel World Summit 2021. So whoever participates in the marketplace, thank you very much. I hope you guys had a very fruitful meeting and hope every business will be helpful in the future. So thank you very much for all the participants, and I'll see you again soon. Anyway, this is day 2, and I calculated yesterday, because of the time differences, Japanese people has to wake at least 5 days in total. So because I'm an MC, I have to attend every single part of this event. I have to keep awake for at least 120 hours. I really need a coffee. Anyway, let me introduce you to the very special people you'll be seeing in our next keynote, which will take place as an interview between Arnie Weissmann and Jessica Nabongo. Now, Arnie has been involved in virtually every aspect of travel journalism over the past 30 years, and he has graced the ATTA event stage multiple times, so many of you may know him. Now, also many of you know him, but he is now the editor-in-chief of Travel Weekly, and he sits on many travel industry advisor boards. So you guys may know him from another part, but he's a very well-known personnel. Now, on the other hand, Jessica is likely new to most of you in the ATTA audience, but it certainly won't be the last time you hear from her. Jessica got her started with traveling when she was just 4 years old. And listen to this. In October 2019, she became the first Black woman to travel every country in the world. So I should say to Jessica, welcome back to Japan. Now, she is the founder and a CEO of The Catch. And in 2019, she was named one of the 30 most powerful women in travel. Jessica is also currently working on her first book to be published by National Geographic in May 2022. Okay, May 2022, National Geographic. So please write down into your calendar. And now, please join me in welcoming Arnie and Jessica to our virtual stage.
Thank you for that introduction, Ken-san. And Jessica, it's good to see you again.
Good to see
where
you
are
too.
you? Where are you right now?
I'm currently in Detroit.
Again, that's
I'm
where you
at
live,
home.
right?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, let's begin at the beginning. So how did all this start? What inspired you to travel to every country in the world?
Yeah, so I was born in Detroit. My parents are Ugandan immigrants who love to travel. So from a very young age, we started traveling. Canada is just across the river from us, and I did my first trip there at 4. And my first transatlantic trip to Uganda was when I was 6 years old. And it sort of just went from there. Vacation was always very important to my parents. Sometimes they took my sisters and I. Sometimes they left us at home when they went to the Bahamas with their friends. And so by the time I graduated high school, I had been to, I think, 7 countries and 1 territory. And so, so post high school into college and beyond, I really loved traveling. I made it a regular part of my life. I started a travel blog in 2009 while living abroad, and I just kept going. You know, I'm a geography nerd. I'm super curious about how people are living all over the world. I also studied international development at the London School of Economics and worked for the UN for several years, as well as USAID. So that all sort of led into like my love of the world and sort of understanding different cultures, political and economic global history, and getting to see those things in person,
So at what point did you realize, oh my gosh, I've been to X number of countries. I can actually set a goal to visit every country in the world.
Well, the thing is, since my early 20s, I'd wanted to visit every country in the world. So, probably by when I was living in London, I think when I was about 24, I'd been to over 30 countries around then. But when I set like a permanent, like a fixed deadline, I had been to 60. So before I always said, oh, I want to go to every country in the world by the time I'm like 40 or 50. And then in 2017, while I was in Indonesia, which was my 60th country, I decided that I wanted to do it by my 35th birthday, which gave me about 2.5 years to visit 135 new countries.
So, what type of countries and activities, as you've been going around, which ones interest you the most, and what sort of is underneath those countries that particularly you find interesting?
Mm-hmm. Well, my favorite regions, definitely Africa and then the Middle East. I would say those are my two favorite regions. Obviously, I've been to every country, but those are the places that I find myself often returning to. And, for me, my entry point into a country is always the people. So, whether they're guides or drivers or whatever, I go in and I build these really amazing relationships with people who are so kind and generous and really want me to learn about their country, learn the history, learn the culture, and also just have a good time. And so that's been how I've seen countries. And so maybe I don't do like the biggest bucket list thing, that people may think to do in a country, but I feel like I've had a deep cultural experience everywhere that I've been.
So at that point when you decided you were going to really make it your goal to try and get there by your 35th birthday, unless countries like Libya and Somalia and Afghanistan and Syria you had already been there, how did you go about visiting countries which most people considered to be not particularly safe or well-regulated in any way?
Mm-hmm. Well, I believe that no country in the world is completely safe and no country in the world is completely unsafe. The fact of the matter is, as a Black person living in the United States, I worry about my safety pretty often. Like, I've had a police officer put a gun in my face at point blank range. That's, the scariest thing that's one of the scariest things that's ever happened to me, and it happened on U.S. soil. So when I travel to places like Afghanistan, Somalia, South Sudan, I connect with a local person who knows more about what's going on the ground because they live there than, the U.S. State Department or, like whatever people on the internet who only know things that they've read on the internet have to say. I work with local people who act as my guide, and obviously they want to make sure that I'm safe when I'm there. And, despite U.S. obvious suggestion or warnings not to go to certain places, I did. And, most of the places that were on the red list when I finished in 2019, most of those I actually did solo and had amazing times. I never felt unsafe in whatever that list of 14 was. I never felt unsafe while I was in those countries. It wasn't like I was hiding or anything like that. Like, I was outside, out and about. I was visiting markets. I was, eating with people, and I always felt completely safe when I was there.
Well, what percentage of your travel has been solo?
So I have been to 89 countries solo, so probably just under 50%.
Right, and how has solo travel and for that matter, travel as a Black woman changed over the time that you've been on the road?
Yeah, I think, solo travel, I think, now a lot more people are doing it, especially a lot more women are definitely doing it. I really enjoy solo travel because I think a lot of times when I'm traveling with my friends, I'm with someone else, so I'm not as inclined to build these deep relationships with local people because I'm experiencing it with my friend. But when I'm solo, all I have are those local people, and I think it allows for a deeper, more beautiful experience. So I'm glad I did that much solo. As a Black woman, I think, how has it changed over time? Probably not that much. I think, a lot of the places that I go, many of them still have never seen Black people because obviously most of the places I went, like in 2019, for example, are so far off the beaten path that, they're not, a lot of them aren't even seeing just Western tourists in general. But yeah, I definitely think over time, like traveling in Europe, I see more Black people traveling in Europe into countries in South America than I certainly saw before. But I think, it was still, I've been so many places that are least visited in the world that they just don't see any tourists at all. So, but I think, what has been interesting is because I got my Ugandan passport, I believe in 2016. And so there's a stark difference between traveling on my American passport and traveling on my Ugandan passport in that when I'm traveling on my Ugandan passport, a lot of times there's an assumption that I'm trying to overstay a visa or, some other reason for traveling besides tourism. But, at the same time, as a visible African using an American passport, a lot of times people think my passport is fake. So, it allowed for some very interesting exchanges with immigration officers all over the world.
Now, is it when you visit Uganda? Is that because it is where your parents are from? Is that experience very different for you because you have sort of a connection that's deeper than a normal tourist would have?
Yeah, I definitely, when I go to Uganda, I feel very comfortable. I feel very at home. I've never actually lived in Uganda. I've been, I don't even know how many times. I've been a number of times and spent an extended amount of time there. But I definitely feel comfortable. The thing is, though, I feel comfortable in so many places. I feel super comfortable in Nairobi, in Accra, in Dakar, in London, in Rome. So I feel... I really am the world is my neighborhood. So for me, it's just going to a different neighborhood. And once I go to a place so many times and build those relationships with friends that I have there, I end up just feeling super comfortable in a lot of places. So.
Yeah. Do you speak Swahili or any other languages?
No, I don't speak Swahili. My parents don't speak Swahili. But I do speak French and... my Spanish is improving and Italian, and I can understand and read some Portuguese.
So how has the pandemic impacted your travels?
Yeah, obviously I've slowed down significantly as compared to previous years. And I think the way that I travel is different in that I haven't been sharing as much. Just because I want to be incredibly respectful of what's going on and, the limitations for other people. I have probably tested more than 50 times for COVID at this point. I test even when it's not required. So, for example, last summer, I did a road trip. And I tested before I traveled because even though there was no requirement, it was domestic, I did so because I didn't want to inadvertently be moving around the country with COVID. So I was testing I think every 2 weeks just to make sure that I was being safe and that I wasn't bringing harm to anyone else. So that's definitely been part of it. I'm vaccinated. I'm used to having been traveling since I was 4. I'm used to having to vaccinate to travel. So, of course, when the COVID vaccine became available, I got it so that I could continue to keep myself safe, but also keep everybody else safe as well.
Yeah, I want to touch on something you said at the beginning of your answer there. So some people who might be considered travel influencers, people who have their travel sponsored and are active on social media, were criticized because they were traveling during the pandemic in areas that were really suffering. So I know you don't think of yourself as an influencer, but has the pandemic changed the way you share your travel experiences?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I recognize that I'm an influencer in many ways. I think that when people think of the typical travel influencer, we are not the same. I think, I travel around the world with just a deeper understanding of culture, just economics, politics, like given my background, going to London School of Economics, given the UN. So I think I just have a different understanding of the world in general. But yeah, I definitely have changed the way that I travel. And I actually, to be fair, I have not been travel shamed, but I think it's because I show myself testing. I wear a mask, and I'm sharing all of those things because the fact of the matter is the travel industry is a multi-trillion-dollar global industry. People who work in that industry have suffered economically, right? And now you shouldn't go to a place where like the government is saying don't go. But I do think there are ways to travel. There are ways to remain safe. And there are ways to contribute to certain economies who require it, right? Like we've seen livelihoods destroyed. I still, I'm in touch with people all over the world because I have guides all over the world. I mean, I've been in touch with my guide from Afghanistan every day for the last week, People need support because borders are closed, and there's no economic activity. So I think that there's definitely a way to travel. There's a way to be safe while traveling. And we have to be respectful. We have to keep ourselves safe and we have to keep others safe. And there's ways to do that. We shouldn't just be blatant and like, I'm just going to go and I'm going to do anything that I feel like doing. That's not the way to do it. We have to be respectful, and there's ways to do that. Not everybody is doing it, but there's certainly ways that you can do it.
Yeah. So, I think most people, hearing all the things that you've done and the places you've been, would see you not just as a travel expert, but an adventure travel expert. And so, as you know, the community listening to this are all members of the Adventure Travel Trade Association. Do you see yourself that way? Do you see yourself as an adventure traveler?
It's so funny. I would say no, because I'm not jumping out of a plane or bungee jumping or doing anything like that. But, I think a lot of what I do, people would consider adventure travel. And for me, I'm just like, just another day in the neighborhood, because I don't have certain fears around doing certain things when I travel. So for me, I wouldn't categorize it as that, but I think a lot of people definitely look at me and are like, she's definitely an adventure traveler.
Yeah. So you've been to places, various different latitudes on the globe. When did you first begin to actually see evidence of climate change in your travels? Can you give some examples of maybe what you saw and its impact on the communities you visited?
That's interesting. Actual climate change. I mean, I think a lot about like single-use plastic and like when that became very apparent that it's such a horrible problem. But climate change itself, it would really be around the extreme temperatures, right? Like actually, even in Uganda, I remember years ago, probably, when was that? Maybe like around 2015, just being in Uganda, the extreme heat that is not normal because Uganda is on the equator. So it's pretty temperate. Like it's pretty much the same all year round. You have rainy season, whatever. But I remember, I think it was like 2013 or 2015, it was so hot and they were saying like, my mom was saying, cause they were eating millet and that's not something they typically eat. Like they eat that when it's like really hard times, but because of the heat, it was, it was altering the harvest of certain agricultural output. So definitely it's the extreme heat, going to the Sahel region, Niger, Mauritania, Burkina, the extreme heat is just ever present and people are suffering from that. Then in the South Pacific, I believe it's Kiribatis's government has already purchased land in Fiji because they're going to have to literally move everybody that lives in that country. The South Pacific Islands, these are tiny, tiny island nations. And when I go there, they're like, oh, yeah, like the shore used to be much further out, but you literally are seeing that their countries are literally going underwater. So And it's something that I talk to people about. And the unfortunate thing about climate change is that the most vulnerable are those in these small island nations who, you know, economically are not doing well. They rely so much, especially in that region, on like Australia and New Zealand's economies to support them. But most of the damage is happening in the Western world, where we're gonna be pretty okay. Like, obviously, we're seeing in the United States, we're seeing wildfires. In Europe, we're seeing a lot of floods. So that certainly people are suffering in the U.S., but the extent of suffering is like, you can't even compare what's happening, unfortunately, in other countries that remain much more vulnerable to all of the damage that we are doing to the planet.
Yeah, you know, there's, you had mentioned travel shaming before. There's also a question of boycotts. A lot of times travelers say, well, I'm not going to go to that country because I don't approve of that government. And Uganda, you know, President Museveni has been criticized both for the anti-gay rights legislation and for his activities in the last election. What is your take on that? What do you, is there any place you wouldn't go because you think the government is just too horrible, or how do you think about that?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I appreciate that you bring up Museveni as well. So those are my two countries. So, you know, we saw what the last 4 years was in America, and Museveni, 1986. How many years are we at now? It's like we're at 35 years now. You know, those are my two governments, which, you know, obviously we've recently had a change in administration here in the U.S., but how am I to go and criticize someone else if these are the two passports that I hold in my hand, you know? So no, there is no country in the world where I'm not going to travel because of what the government is doing. And why is that? Economic boycotts and embargoes, they do not touch these governments. The corruption runs very deep. Their money is in Switzerland. Their money is outside of their country. So if we put an embargo on them, they're fine. They can still do whatever they want to do because they still have access to millions of dollars. But who those embargoes are hurting, it's the people. The embargo against Cuba is not going to stop the Cuban government from doing whatever they want to do. It's stopping tourism and tourists from going and supporting the little bed and breakfast. It's stopping the little, you know, the woman who's selling fruit or has like a tiny restaurant that's like in the front of her house. Without people going in and spending that money, their livelihoods are worsening because of this embargo that is meant to force the hand of these governments. It doesn't work that way. Like, again, I've studied this stuff. I've worked in this space. It doesn't work that way. I think a lot about Venezuela. When I was in Venezuela, there was a young man, and he was my kind of like a little fixer. He was just helping me to make sure that I was okay in the airport getting on my domestic flight to Los Roques. And I just gave him $5, you know, like, oh, thanks so much for your help. And so he ended up staying with me until it was time for me to get on the plane. And we were chatting, and he was saying, like, yes, right now in Venezuela, most people are making $2 to $3 a month. And I'm like, what? And he's like, but I have a good job, so I make $5 a month. And I'm like, wait, the tip that I just gave you was your monthly salary? And he said, yeah. You know, I was just like, oh, here's $5. Thank you for your help. Didn't think anything of it. And he's telling me that's his monthly salary. I ended up giving him another $20 because, you know, my cash was limited and I can't use my card in Venezuela because of the U.S. embargo. So my cash was very limited, but I gave him another $20. In that interaction, he got 5 months' salary, right? I also stayed at a small bed and breakfast there that was owned by this beautiful old woman on the island. I spent money in restaurants while there. I had a tour guide who I spent money with. What if I never went to Venezuela? What if I never interacted with that man? What if I never stayed at that woman's small hotel? What if I never paid her for the lunch and the breakfast and the dinners that she made for me? that is a direct economic impact on those women and those men of that country that would not have happened if I sat on my high horse and said, oh no, the government of Venezuela is horrible. I'm not going to go and spend my money in that country. I'm not. Okay, what does the government get from me? They get the money for the visa. Sure. So yes, I'm giving $90, $160 to these governments, but I'm spending way more money than that in hotels, in restaurants, in tips, in taxis. And that's what matters, that economic impact on that personal level. Sure, I could give to an international organization that tells me they're doing something, but I know that a lot of these international organizations, that money is going to overhead costs and very little is trickling down. But with that man, Jihan, I know that I gave him $25. That's going to help him support his family. So no, there's no country in the world that I will put off limits because of their government.
Yeah. You had mentioned earlier in terms of adventure travel, you're not going to want to jump out of an airplane or anything like that. But do you spend much time in natural areas? Have you climbed any mountains? Have you done any things that go into the non-adrenaline aspect of adventure travel?
Yeah, for sure. I love hiking. I did Mount Fuji when I was living in Japan, which was incredible because we started at night and we watched sunrise at the top, which was beautiful. I am almost a certified diver, but I do a lot of like snorkeling where possible. I did go diving in Maui. So I'm a lover of water. So anything I can do there, I've done, dog sledding a couple of times up in Scandinavia. So I love the outdoors. I'm such an outdoors person. Even in the U.S., like we have such amazing national parks. I love biking and hiking in the U.S.'s national parks. So I'm definitely an outdoors girl. I just don't want my adrenaline spiking too high.
So you're writing a book right now that's going to be published by National Geographic. What's that all about? What angle are you taking for that?
Yeah, so I'm writing about 100 countries. So there's 100 stories from 100 countries, the ones that I feel like had the most impact on me. I think there's a lot of countries that people are going to be surprised to say like, oh, you can pick 100 countries in the world and you pick this. So I really hope that what people get from the book is that they sort of see the world in a different way. I think, we mostly see the world through the lens of white men. Like, even if you look back, even at National Geographic, if you look back at the early 1900s, who the explorers were and who were the photographers and all of that, it's typically been white men. And so I think that I offer something different from a woman's perspective and also from the perspective of a Black person and an African. So I really hope that the book changes hearts and minds and gets the industry overall to think a little bit more about how we characterize countries and how we talk about people in those countries.
So if I don't know whether you've ranked them in the book, but what would be the number one experience that you would maybe want to share? And also, tell me a little bit about how you think, from a Black woman's perspective, you were able to see something that I might not have been able to see.
That's a really great question. I'm not the ranking type, so there is no ranking. But I think one of my favorite travel experiences was definitely spending several hours in a cattle camp in South Sudan. Cattle are incredibly important to the Dinka people, and it was just really cool. It was really cool to see how they love their animals, just to just experience being there and like living. I mean, I didn't stay there, but just seeing how they live in the community around it. And everything is so temporary because once there is nothing else for the cattle to graze on, then they move. So these are people who have very temporary housing situations. But it was really beautiful just to see that reality. So yeah, as far as what I see, I think for me, like, I grew up as an African, right? Like, I grew up going to my mom's village where there's no running water or electricity, and it was normal for me. It wasn't like, oh gosh, they're so poor. This is so awful. Like, I'm so sorry for you. Because it was just like, okay, we're going home. You know, I'm hanging out with my cousins. Like, sometimes we were like playing around with the farm animals or whatever. And at night we had lanterns and flashlights, and it just was, right? It wasn't bad. It wasn't good. It just was. And I think that experience at such a young age really colors how I see the world. I don't look at things as bad versus good. Everything just is. It's different. You know, all of these things are very different, but I really try not to put a value judgment on it. Now, okay, yes, some people don't have their basic needs met. That is a problem, right? Like, I think as humanity, we want everyone to have their basic needs met, but we have to understand the difference between like basic needs and sort of material wealth, right? So my mom's side of the family, sure, they don't have material wealth, but like they have incredibly bountiful agricultural land, you know, the kids are in school and all of that, but they just don't have material wealth. What's the value of that material wealth, you know? So I think that's really the difference in just how I see the world.
So what advice or tips would you have for others who might also have ambitions to see as much of the world as possible, if not every country, and particularly women, people of color, and solo travelers?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is like moving with positive energy, right? I really, truly believe like, because I move with positive energy, the universe brings that to me. So when I land in a place, it's like I'm all of these wonderful people, like I'm, you know, it's like magnetic because I'm moving with that energy. And it's really made my experiences incredible. And I always say, like, my stomach is coated in positive energy. I've never had food poisoning in my entire life. You know, and I remember I was in Pakistan and I was with these local guys, the photographers. We were hanging out and I saw this food in the market and I said, oh, I want to try that. And they were like, no, do not eat that. I'm like, why? They're like, your stomach will not survive. And I'm like, but there's all these people in line. It must be good and it must be okay. And they were like, we don't even eat it. I'm like, whatever. I ate it. It was delicious and I was fine. And they couldn't even believe it. They were like, how are you not sick? And I was like, I don't know. So because I don't move with an energy of fear. I don't move and think, oh no, something's going to happen to me. And nothing happened. I've never used a hotel safe in my entire life. Not one time. And I've never had anything stolen from me. Not a passport, not a dime. And I mean, sometimes I've like left things out when they come to clean the room. I've never had anything stolen from me because I don't expect it. So I think the best thing that we can do is just move and travel with an open mind, positive energy. And that's really what you're going to be, you know, you're going to get back. Now, follow your intuition. If something feels off, you know, then kind of follow that. But just be open and positive.
You know, when you think about the future and the future of travel, I mean, there's things like climate change. There's a greater awareness of the possibility of pandemics and things like that. And there's also some really interesting things happening in technology in terms of, you know, the space flights, for instance, that Richard Branson is doing. Is also, he's looking at a way to get maybe from London to Sydney in 2 hours. You know, that there's a commercial application too. When you look at the future of travel, kind of the pros and the cons. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But when you look at the future of travel, pros and cons, because there's some challenges certainly. What are you excited about and what are you worried about?
You know, I think I'm excited because even obviously the pandemic is horrible, but I hope that what we got out of it is understanding how connected we are, right? Borders don't matter. We saw that. Pandemics can move, viruses can move across borders. Borders do not matter. So I'm hoping that, my hope is that we feel more connected as people travel in the future. They travel much slower. And I hope that they travel seeking to understand the people in a place more than just like, hey, I'm laying on a beach, I'm getting a picture and I'm going home, but really seeking to make connections. It is my hope that that's how more people begin to travel. Obviously what's scary about the prospect of future travel is just the destruction to the planet, and that is terrifying. There was a new report that came out, last week now, and it's just terrifying what's happening all over the world. And I think just economically and from like a governmental geopolitical perspective that we have to focus more on regional trade, right? We're all about globalization and I'm getting this and it's coming from China and I'm getting that and it's coming from Australia. It's like, no, maybe we should stop shipping things around the planet and just like, you get what your neighbor produces, like if you're in East Africa, Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, maybe you can trade with Southern Africa, but do you have to trade with China? I think that we have to really look at, we have to really start to look at global trade and the damage that global trade is doing to the planet as well, because we don't think about it, right? There's all these ships that are moving in the middle of the night and all throughout the day, and we don't think about it until there's a ship stuck in the Sinai Peninsula and everybody's like, oh, whoa, like that's crazy. But I do think that beyond just travel, we have to think about how we're connected and how everything we're doing is sort of damaging the planet, and thinking like, how can we improve our behaviors economically and in terms of travel.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Jessica. Is there anything else that we haven't touched on that you would want to share with this audience?
No, I love the questions. I think this was pretty wide-ranging. I think, I would just say, like, things are really tough right now. I think things are great for a lot of us, but things are really difficult for a lot of people, both domestically and internationally. And Haiti just suffered another earthquake, and I think where possible, do your research, find organizations that you can support. I encourage people to support smaller organizations that have smaller overhead and that really are working with families to improve their lives, in Afghanistan and Haiti and just so many other places in the world. And I would just honestly say continue being a good neighbor. When you see someone on the street, ask them if they need help. If you live in a community where refugees are coming in, make them feel at home. Because if you went somewhere else, you want people to make you feel at home. So I just think we all have to love up on each other a little more, love up on our planet, try to reduce our use of single-use plastic as much as possible, and just really be good humans.
Oh. Thank you so much, Jessica. Really interesting insights that you have, and you've been able to take the experiences and give something back. I think a lot of times travelers just kind of travel and very selfishly, and they don't necessarily pick up the lessons that you've picked up, and then your ability to share them, I think, is really wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Arnie.